The first thing Eve Okafor understood about dying was that it had a smell. Not blood, not burning, something older. Something like iron left in rain, like the inside of a clock that had been running for 1,000 years without winding down. She'd smelled it twice in her life before today. Once when they'd pulled her father out of the wreckage on the A13, and once in the lab on the morning Dr. Vasily told her the fold had opened. Today she was going to smell it again. She was counting on it. She stood at the center of the fold chamber and let Corin run the pre-dive checklist one final time. The chamber was 8 meters wide, perfectly circular, built into the basement of what used to be a pharmaceutical warehouse in Woolwich. The walls were lined with the resonance coils, 212 of them, each one calibrated to a specific harmonic signature, each one worth more than most small countries. Above her head, the air shimmered like heat haze over tarmac, that particular wrongness that happened when the fold was close to opening. A sound like tinnitus, but lower. A sound you felt in your back teeth. Heart rate 104, Corin said. He was reading from the biometric board without looking at her, which was how she knew he was scared. Corin only refused to meet her eyes when he was scared. That's elevated, I'm aware. Eve, run the checklist, Corin. He exhaled through his nose, went back to the board. Temporal anchor locked to the primary marker. Resonance coils at 97.3%. That's inside tolerance. He paused. Barely. Barely is enough. The margin on a 2.4-year backward displacement is, I've read the math. Then you know that if the anchor drifts by more than 40 milliseconds in either direction, the return window closes. Permanently. You land in the past and you stay there. And before you say it, yes, I know you've accepted that risk. I'm saying it anyway because someone should. She turned and looked at him properly then. Corin was 41 years old, bald since 25, and had the specific kind of exhausted face that came from 3 years of working on something the rest of the world called impossible. He'd been her father's graduate student before her father died. He'd been her first phone call after she'd decoded the resonance equations. He had not once in 3 years suggested she was wrong to try this. He was suggesting it now, not in words. But she could read it in the set of his shoulders, the way his hands weren't quite still on the board. He was your friend too, she said. I know. So let me go. Corin looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned back to the board and finished the checklist. Outside the chamber, through 2 floors of reinforced concrete, the city went about its business. Buses, arguments, someone's kid playing music too loud. The whole enormous ordinary machinery of the world, indifferent to the fact that in the basement of a Woolwich warehouse, a 26-year-old woman was about to punch a hole through the membrane of time and walk back into a night that had broken her open. She thought about her parents, the way her mother used to hum while she cooked. Always the same fragment of the same song, never the whole thing, just that one looping bar that Eve had spent years trying to identify. The way her father told jokes with the punchline first and the setup second. So proud of the reversal he could never quite hide his own delight. 2 people who had made a life so specific, so irreproducibly them, that their absence had left a shape in the world that nothing else could fill. She thought about the night they'd died. A road, rain, a lorry whose driver had fallen asleep at the wheel, an accident, or not. 3 months ago, going through her father's files, archived research from before his death, stuff she'd been putting off for 2 years, she'd found the anomaly. A log entry, 3 weeks before the accident. Her father describing a vehicle that had been following him. A silver vehicle, no plates, that appeared outside the university twice, and outside their home once, and that her father, being her father, had documented with photographs and coordinates, and the exact timestamps of each sighting. The photographs were grainy. The vehicle was distinctive. And 6 days ago, cross-referencing her father's photographs against traffic camera archives from the night of the accident, Eve had found it. Silver. No plates. Parked 200 meters from the impact site 40 minutes before the lorry went through the central reservation. Not an accident. She didn't know who. She didn't know why. She knew only that her parents had been killed deliberately, that whoever had done it was still out there somewhere, that the police had closed the case as a road traffic fatality, and that the only way to bring them back, the only way to undo what had been done, was to go back to that night and stop it from happening. The fold pulsed. The air above her cracked open along an invisible seam, and for a moment she could see through it. Not a place, not a time, but the space between them. The space where time was just a coordinate, where any point on the line could theoretically be reached. Theoretically. Anchor holding, Corin said. His voice was flat now, controlled. Window is open. You have 90 seconds before displacement becomes unstable. Eve closed her eyes, smelled iron and rain and the inside of a 1,000-year clock. Tell me when to jump, she said. Now, said Corin. Go. She stepped into the fold. The sensation of temporal displacement was not what she'd expected the first time she'd done it. She'd done it 4 times now. Each one a short hop, minutes or hours, to calibrate the equipment, to test her own biological tolerance. Each time she described it to Corin afterward, and each time he'd written her description down, and each time the description was different, because the experience was different every single time. As if the fold were alive and adjusting itself to match whatever you most needed it to feel like. This time it felt like drowning. Not the terrifying kind, the other kind. The kind you imagine sometimes when you were small and standing at the edge of the pool and the water looked very still and very blue, and the idea of going under felt like a kind of rest. She fell through the membrane of 2.4 years. She came up gasping on a pavement in Stratford. Rain. Immediate, cold, completely serious rain. The kind that London did in November like a personal statement. She was on her knees on wet concrete beside a bus shelter. She checked her watch. The analog one, the one she'd wound before she left because she didn't trust electronic timekeeping inside the fold's residual field. 23:42. 18 minutes before the lorry would cross the central reservation on the A13, 3 kilometers away. She ran. The streets at this hour were not empty. London was never truly empty. There were night buses, minicabs, a group of men arguing cheerfully outside a chicken shop, a woman walking a dog who didn't look up as Eve sprinted past. The rain hammered down, and the streetlights turned the puddles gold, and Eve ran in the clothes she'd worn to the warehouse. Cargo trousers, a waterproof jacket, the steel-toed boots she'd started wearing after the second lab accident. Not ideal, but she'd calculated the run time. She had enough. What she had not calculated, what she had specifically failed to account for in 3 years of planning was the car, silver. No plates. It was parked on the street she was running down, engine idling, facing her direction. As she came around the corner at full speed, she nearly ran straight into the bonnet. She pulled up short, skidded on wet tarmac, caught herself on a parked van. The silver car sat there, engine running, headlights off. Her heart was doing something complicated. She forced herself to breathe, checked the watch. 16 minutes. She looked at the car. Someone's inside. She couldn't see a face. The windscreen was opaque with rain and reflected sodium light. But there was a silhouette still, watching her. She had 2 choices and she made the wrong one immediately by walking toward the car. The door opened. The person who got out was not what she'd expected. She didn't know what she'd expected. Some agent, some operative. Someone with the language of violence written into their posture. What she got was a woman, mid-30s, slim, wearing a dark coat, dark eyes that were assessing Eve with the same calm intensity with which Eve was assessing her. "You're early," the woman said. Eve stopped. "What? You're early, by about 6 minutes. The woman tilted her head. "The first version of you arrived at 23:50, but you've run a different route this time. Faster." The back of Ive's neck went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the rain. "The first version," she said carefully. "You've done this before." The woman looked at her without particular emotion. "This is the 4th loop. You keep coming back to this street. You keep trying to stop the car from reaching the A13. You never manage it in time. But each time you come back, you're a little faster. A little closer." I've never." "Not yet," the woman said. "From your perspective, this is the first time. I understand that. I'm trying to help you." "Who are you?" The woman didn't answer. Instead, she looked over Eve's shoulder and said quietly, "You need to go now. You have 14 minutes. "Who are you?" Eve said again louder, but she was already moving, already running, because she could hear the urgency in the woman's voice even underneath the flatness, and because 14 minutes was not enough time to stand here asking questions. She ran. Behind her, she heard the silver car door close. She didn't look back. She reached the A13 with 9 minutes to spare. The slip road was wet and dark and the traffic was light. There was never much traffic out here at this hour on a Tuesday night in November. She came down the embankment at a controlled slide, landed on the verge, moved to a position behind the crash barrier where she could see the road in both directions. Her parents would be coming from the east. Her father had been driving. He always drove when they were together, an old habit from before Eve was born that her mother had long since given up fighting. They would have been coming back from her aunt's house in Barking. Eve knew this from the accident report, from the time she'd read it, from the time she'd wished she hadn't. The lorry would come from the west. The driver would have been awake for 19 hours. His blood caffeine level was documented in the report. The road markings that separated the carriageways had been worn down by that stretch, repainted 2 weeks after the accident as part of a maintenance schedule that had been repeatedly delayed. A worn line on a wet road on a night when a tired man's eyes closed for 4 seconds. 4 seconds. Eve crouched behind the barrier and waited and thought about 4 seconds. The specific cruelty of how little time it took to end everything. How the world didn't pause, didn't mark the moment. The rain kept falling. The road kept being wet. The worn line kept being worn. She saw her father's car first. A blue Volvo, reliable and unfashionable, her father's particular brand of practicality. It was doing a steady 60, well within the limit, headlights clean and bright. She could see, or thought she could see, at this distance through rain, the silhouette of her mother in the passenger seat. She moved before she could think about it. Later, much later, in another context entirely, she would understand that this was the specifically human thing about what she did next. Not the physics, not the engineering, not the 3 years of work that had made the fold possible. The thing that made her specifically human was this. She did not calculate. She did not model outcomes. She moved because someone she loved was in danger, and there was no distance between that fact and her feet. She vaulted the crash barrier and ran onto the carriageway. She was in the middle lane, facing oncoming traffic, waving both arms. The Volvo's headlights caught her, and she saw the brake lights flare red, and the car slew slightly on the wet road, controlled. Her father was always controlled, and came to a stop 30 meters away. The lorry. She heard it before she saw it. The distinctive bass note of an HGV doing 60 on a wet A road. The specific sound of something massive and unstoppable going about its business. And then the headlights in her peripheral vision, coming from the wrong direction, the lorry that had drifted over the worn line. And she ran. She ran toward her father's car, and she hit the verge on the far side, and she was rolling down the embankment when the lorry went through the space where the Volvo had been. It clipped the rear bumper, the Volvo spun. It came to rest on the verge 50 meters further on, nose down in the ditch, no fire, no catastrophic impact, alive. Eve lay on her back at the bottom of the embankment and looked at the sky, and the rain came down into her open eyes and she thought, alive. She climbed back up the embankment on her hands and knees. Her waterproof jacket had a tear down the left arm. Her boots were full of water. She was shaking in a way that seemed to have nothing to do with cold. The Volvo had come to rest at an angle on the verge, its nose in the ditch, its rear wheels still on the tarmac. The engine was dead. The hazard lights were blinking. She reached the passenger side and knocked on the window. Her mother looked at her through the glass. Eve Okafor had spent 2 years not looking at photographs of her mother because she couldn't do it without the thing happening. The specific catastrophic thing that happened in her chest when she was reminded of what was gone. She had built the fold in the space that grief made, which is to say she had built it out of nothing but that catastrophic thing, had turned it into equations and resonance coils and calibrated tolerances and 90 seconds in a window above Woolwich. Her mother's face looked exactly like it always looked. Eve pressed her hand flat against the window. "It's all right," she said, loudly enough to be heard through the glass. "You're all right. Don't move. I'm calling." The window went down. Her mother's voice, "Are you hurt? My God, are you all right? I'm fine, are you? James." Her mother turning, hand on her father's arm. "James, I see her," her father's voice. The specific dry warmth of it that she'd spent 2 years trying to remember precisely, and now didn't need to remember anymore, because here it was, undiminished. "Hello. I don't suppose you want to tell me what you were doing standing in the middle of the A13 at midnight?" Eve laughed. It came out slightly broken. "Not especially," she said. Her father looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You have my eyes." The world went very still. "I know," she said. She didn't stay. She couldn't stay. The return window was still technically open. Corin had built in a 4-hour buffer on the anchor. Long enough for contingencies, not long enough for conversations she wasn't ready to have. She gave them her phone number. Not her actual number, a burn she'd brought specifically for this. Registered to a false name. Told them it was important they call the police and report the lorry, and that they should have their car checked before driving it again. Her father watched her with that same expression through all of this. Careful, assessing, not skeptical exactly, but running probabilities. She had his eyes. She was halfway down the road, heading back toward the displacement marker she'd set in an alley 3 streets from the embankment, when she heard the footsteps behind her. The woman from the silver car. Successful, the woman said. Not a questions. Eve kept walking. Who are you? Someone who has been watching this loop for a long time. The woman fell into step beside her. Her voice had that same flat quality. Not cold exactly, but remote. Like someone describing something they'd already processed. Longer than you realize. Are you responsible for what happened to my parents? A pause. No. Then who was? Another pause. Longer. That answer is more complicated than you have time for right now. Your anchor window closes in 22 minutes. You need to reach your displacement marker. Then talk fast. The woman was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed slightly. Not softer, but less remote. Like someone choosing to be present instead of analytical. Your father's research, she said. His work on resonance harmonics. You thought you were building the fold based on his early papers. The theoretical groundwork. Yes. He wasn't doing theoretical work. He was documenting something he'd already found. A resonance signature that was occurring naturally, appearing and disappearing at irregular intervals, that he'd been tracking for 8 years before he died. He didn't know what it was. He knew it was significant. He was getting close to understanding it. Eve stopped walking. The people who killed him, she said, wanted his research, specifically his location data, the signature he was tracking. The woman stopped beside her. They didn't get it. He'd fragmented the data across too many systems, and he died before they could extract the relevant sequences. They've been looking for it ever since. What is it? The signature? The woman looked at her. For the first time in the conversation, she seemed to be making a decision about something. A door, she said, a naturally occurring fold, fixed position, one of several. Your father found one. They want to use it. Use it for what? To come through. Eve stood on the wet pavement in the rain and parsed the specific choice of words. Not to go through. To come through. Who is coming through, she said. The woman's expression did not change. Entities that have been waiting for a door like this for a very long time. She made it back to the displacement marker with 4 minutes to spare. The fold opened on schedule. She stepped through and came up in the chamber in Woolwich End, and Corin was there with a blanket and a flask of something hot, and the expression of a person who had been running catastrophic scenarios in his head for 4 hours, and was only now standing down from them. Successful, she said before he could ask. He exhaled, sat down heavily on the equipment bench. Completely the car missed, clipped the bumper. They're both. She stopped. They're alive. Both of them. Corin put his hands over his face for a moment. When he brought them down, he was not quite crying, but in the neighborhood of it. Okay, he said. Okay. Good. There's something else. She sat down across from him and drank from the flask. It was tea, strong, slightly too sweet, which was exactly what she needed. Someone was there. A woman, she said. Corin, she said my father was tracking a naturally occurring resonance signature, a fixed fold, and that the people who killed him wanted the location. Corin had gone still. The particular stillness of someone receiving information that confirms a fear they'd been managing. You knew, she said. I suspected. He looked at the floor. I didn't have enough to say anything concrete, but yes. There were parts of his research that never made sense as pure theory. Things he'd documented too specifically for theoretical work. I assumed, he stopped. I thought I was wrong. I wanted to be wrong. You weren't. She leaned forward. She said entities, not humans, not a government, not a corporation, entities that are waiting to come through. Corin looked up at her. The word entities, he said slowly, is doing a lot of work. I know. She said nothing more specific. Not enough time. My anchor window was closing. Eve set down the flask. She knew about the loops, the previous iterations of the displacement. She said this was the 4th time I'd come back to that street. She knew I'd be faster this time. That's impossible unless she's been through a fold herself, yes. Or unless something outside the fold has been observing from a position that isn't inside time. She watched his face. I know how that sounds. It sounds, Corin said carefully, like your father's research was about something considerably larger than we thought. The next 6 weeks were not the 6 weeks Eve had expected to have. She had expected, after the displacement, to have a strange transitional period of adjustment. The timeline had changed. Her parents were alive. Somewhere in the city, in a hospital probably, being checked over after the accident. They existed. They had her number. They might call it. What she had not expected was how much that fact would displace her own gravity. She had spent 2 years organizing herself around grief the way a city organizes itself around a river. Every road, every bridge, every route accounting for the absence at the center. And now the river was back and she didn't know where to stand. She stood in the lab. She stood in front of the resonance coil arrays and the data panels, and the carefully archived readings from 140 test calibrations. And she tried to think about what the woman had told her. Entities, a door, her father's location data. She began going through his research. Not the papers she'd already read, the theoretical work, the published material, the careful academic architecture he'd built over decades. She went through the raw files, the data logs, the stuff that lived in deep archive folders with dates instead of names, the stuff she'd been systematically avoiding for 2 years, because opening it felt too much like talking to him. She found the signature on the 15th day. It was in a folder labeled simply with a grid reference and a year. The grid reference resolved to a location in the Thames estuary, an unremarkable stretch of mudflat and water, not near anything significant, not near anything at all. The data logs ran for 8 years. The signature appeared and disappeared at irregular intervals, always at the same coordinates, always with the same harmonic profile. The profile was, and here she sat back in her chair and felt something move in her chest that was not grief, exactly, but its close neighbor. The profile was identical to the harmonic signature of the fold she had built. Not similar, identical. Her father had not built the theory and she had not built the application. They had both independently found the same door. She printed the coordinates, folded the paper into her pocket, went to get her coat. The Thames estuary at 3 in the morning in December was not a welcoming place. She'd driven out here on the old A13, the same road, in a different direction, a fact that sat in her mind with a quiet weight, and parked on a maintenance track that ran along the top of the seawall. Below her, the estuary was gray and wide, and moving in that almost imperceptible way that large bodies of water moved at night, more felt than seen. The coordinates placed the signature 200 meters offshore. She stood on the seawall and opened her portable resonance monitor and pointed it at the water. The screen lit up like a Christmas tree. The signature was active. Strong. Stronger than her own fold chamber, at 97.3%. Stronger than anything she'd managed to generate with 212 custom resonance coils and 3 years of calibration. Whatever this thing was, it was not subtle. She watched the readings for several minutes. The signature was stable, regular. It was cycling, not randomly appearing and disappearing, as her father's early data had suggested, but cycling on a period of approximately 40 minutes. Open for a window, closed for a window, open again. Like breathing, like waiting. She was thinking about this, standing on the seawall in the cold, with the wind off the estuary moving her hair and the monitor in her hands, and the reading cycling patient and enormous across the screen, when the voice came from behind her. It's been active for 11 days continuously, the woman said. This is the longest sustained cycle we've recorded. Eve did not spin around. She'd heard the footsteps on the seawall. How long have you been following me? Since you went through the fold the first time. I've been watching this particular fold for considerably longer. You told me entities were waiting to come through. Eve turned now. The woman was standing 10 meters away, hands in her coat pockets. I want to know what that means. It means what it sounds like. Non-human entities, yes. Hostile. The woman was quiet for a moment. That's not quite the right question. They're not hostile in the way you're imagining. Not aggressive, not predatory in any conventional sense. But their intentions are misaligned with the continued existence of this version of human civilization. Profoundly misaligned. Eve looked at the monitor, at the enormous steady pulse of something she'd spent 3 years building a small imitation of. What do they want? Access. Specifically to your planet's electromagnetic substrate. The planet's own resonance field, which is entangled with the fold. If they come through and establish a stable presence, they will begin modifying that substrate to suit their biology. The side effects for every organism on this planet that evolved within that substrate would be, she stopped. Significant, Eve repeated. That's a very calm word. I don't have a less calm one that's accurate. Eve looked at the water, at the horizon which was beginning to separate itself from the sky in the very first gray suggestion of dawn. She thought about her father, about 8 years of data logs, about a man who had spent 8 years standing somewhere on this estuary, perhaps, taking readings, documenting a signature he couldn't explain, watching a door that something was pressing against from the other side. He'd known, not completely, but he'd known it was important. He'd known it was something that needed to be found and watched and understood, and someone had killed him to stop him finding out what it was. Can it be closed, she said. The fold, theoretically. It would require a counter-resonance field of sufficient magnitude to collapse the harmonic signature. Permanently, it would destroy any natural fold within a roughly 2-kilometer radius. The woman paused, including any technology-generated folds in that radius. Eve turned to look at her. "You want to use my equipment. Your equipment is the only thing within range that could generate the counter-resonance. The lab in Woolwich is inside the 2-kilometer marker." The woman met her eyes. "I know what that costs, the work you've done, the time it took, what it was built to do." "It was built to bring back the dead," Eve said. "And I've done that." She looked at the estuary again, at the signature pulsing steady and ancient on her monitor. "Tell me what I need to configure." She didn't tell Corin what she was doing. She told him she needed to run a maximum output test of the counter-resonance array, a procedure that, in the normal course of events, would have been months away. She told him it was a calibration test. He looked at her with the eyes of a man who knew her well enough to know when she wasn't telling him the whole story. And he helped her anyway, because he was that kind of person. The configuration took 9 hours. The counter-resonance array was not something she'd built for this purpose. She'd built it as a safety system, a way to collapse a runaway fold before it could cause structural damage to the chamber. Repurposing it as a weapon was a matter of parameters, mostly, changing what it was aimed at, scaling the output to something that would carry across 2 kilometers of city and estuary to find a harmonic signature and cancel it permanently. She ran the calculations twice. Then she ran them a third time. At 1700 hours, she sat down next to Corin and said, "There's something I need to tell you." She told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which was something she'd always valued about him. When she finished, he was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Your father found this 8 years ago." "Yes, and the people who killed him wanted the location data so they could use it, facilitate the entities coming through. I don't know what they were offered. I don't know if they understood what they were offering access to. Or they did understand and they didn't care. That too." She looked at the configuration readouts. "I need to fire the array tonight. The signature is in its longest sustained active cycle. If I wait for the next one, you don't know if there'll be a next one. If they're this close, they might come through before the cycle repeats." Corin nodded slowly. "What does firing the array do to this lab?" "Destroys the coils. Probably most of the ancillary systems. The chamber itself might survive structurally." She met his eyes. "The fold capability is gone. Permanently. Permanently." Corin looked at the chamber, at the 212 resonance coils, at the 3 years of work distributed across every surface and system in the room. Eve watched him do it. She knew what he was seeing. She'd already done her own version of this looking, and she'd stood on the seawall in the cold and made her choice. "Right," Corin said. "Let's fire it." At 2140, with the Thames estuary's fold signature showing maximum amplitude on every sensor she had pointed at it, Eve initialized the counter-resonance array. The coils spun up. The sound that filled the chamber was enormous. Not loud, exactly, but enormous. A frequency that occupied a register below normal hearing and sat in the chest like something pressing from inside. The air cracked. The shimmer above the chamber floor became a different kind of shimmer, directed, intentional. A signal rather than a symptom. She looked at the portable monitor. At the estuary signature, she watched it pulse. Steady, enormous, ancient, and then she watched it collapse. Not quickly, not instantly. It died the way a fire died, the way something very large died. First an irregularity in the cycle, then a stuttering, then a long diminishing. The harmonic profile unraveled at the edges first, then at the center. The signature that her father had spent 8 years documenting, that something unimaginable had been pressing against for who knew how long, came apart across her screen in real time. The array's coils burned out one by one. She heard them go, small discrete cracks, almost delicate, moving around the chamber in a sequence like a slow round of applause. At 2158, the signature flatlined. At 2200, the last coil burned out and the chamber went quiet. Eve stood in the middle of a room full of ruined equipment and the smell of hot metal, and something that was not quite ozone, and not quite anything she had a name for. Corin was at the board. Every reading was static. She picked up the portable monitor. The screen was blank except for the flat line. "It's gone," she said. "All of it? All of it." She set the monitor down. "Every naturally occurring fold in the area, and everything we built." Corin nodded. Sat down, said nothing for a while. "Then, the people who killed your parents, they'll know the signature is gone. They'll know someone closed it. Yes, they'll come looking. Probably. Eve looked at the blank monitor, at the ruined coils, at the chamber that had been, for 3 years, the whole of her world. Let them. We know what they were working for now. We know what they were willing to do. And we know things about resonance harmonics and temporal displacement that nobody else knows. She looked at Corin. We built this once. We can build something else. Corin looked at her for a long moment. Your parents, he said. They have your number. Yes, have they called? Not yet. They will, he said with the simple certainty of someone who had known her for a long time. Eve looked at the ruined chamber, at the empty air where the shimmer used to live. She thought about a blue Volvo on a wet road, about brake lights going red, about 4 seconds and the specific cruelty of how little time it took to end everything, and it turned out, how little time it took to begin it again. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. London area code. She picked it up. Hello, said her mother's voice. Eve sat down on the floor of the ruined chamber and closed her eyes and listened to the sound of something she had built the impossible to hear again. Hi, she said. I've been waiting for you to call. Outside, London went on being London, enormous, indifferent, fully alive. The estuary was just an estuary again. The door was closed. Whatever had been pressing against it from the other side would have to find another way, another door, another planet that hadn't figured out in time what it was standing on the edge of. This one was taken. This one had people in it who burned down everything they built if that's what it took. This one had its dead back.